Welcome to the Mormonism and Masturbation video. There really is no definitive scripture regarding masturbation. Some Christians argue that Leviticus 14 is talking about masturbation, but it could also be talking about early withdrawal or coitus interruptus and just spilling some of your semen on the ground or on your clothes. Again, this is the Mosaic law, so it doesn't really apply to New Testament times or to our times. But it says, and if any man's seed of copulation go out from him, so in other words, sperm, then he shall wash all of his flesh in water, and be unclean until the evening, and every garment and every skin, whereon is the seed of copulation, in other words, semen, shall be washed with water, and be unclean until the evening. So that's the Mosaic law. The other one is Genesis 38. Some Christians say this is regarding masturbation, but biblical scholars have determined that this, again, is early withdrawal or coitus interruptus. But we'll read it anyway. It says, And Judah said unto Onan, Go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up the seed to thy brother. Raise up seed to thy brother. So maybe the brother had passed on. And it was up to Onan to have more seed with his brother's wife. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, and it came to pass when he went in unto his brother's wife that he spilled it on the ground. In other words, he spilled semen onto the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, whereupon he slew him. So it sounds like he killed him also. So in the Mosaic times, or in Genesis here, God didn't like the spilling of semen onto the ground. Let's get to some of the science here regarding masturbation. There's actually a downside to being abstinent and to not masturbating. This is from the British Journal of Urology. It says, recent scientific studies point to the health risk of male prostate cancer by those who attempt to be sexually abstinent. So those who are abstinent, there's a higher risk of male prostate cancer. Or those that have low ejaculation levels. In other words, those who don't masturbate, there's also a higher health risk of male prostate cancer. Okay, a couple other sex journals here. Scientific literature says that females who avoid masturbation are at a higher risk of sexual dysfunction and poor marital adjustment. Those who avoid masturbation have a higher risk of sexual dysfunction and poor marital adjustment. Many are pre-orgasmic. In other words, they cannot have orgasms even when they're married. Okay, the article, Historical Development of New Masturbation Attitudes in the Mormon Culture, says that research physicians have verified a link between masturbation shame and mental health risks in the youth. And everybody knows there's a lot of masturbation shame in the Mormon culture, but it leads to more mental health risks in the youth who reported suicidal ideation associated with attempted masturbation abstinence. So those who are trying to be abstinent have higher reported risk in suicidal ideation. Thoughts in your head, I wish that I was dead. Or you can have active suicidal ideation when you're actually getting ready to go through with it. Okay, having a healthy marriage. Well, masturbation can help you with that, believe it or not. Journal of Sex Education and Therapy. It says, masturbation today is recognized as an important developmental step towards a healthy marital functioning and is often prescribed as part of the treatment for some types of sexual dysfunction. So that's interesting. All right, the Boy Scouts of America Scout Handbook, 1972 edition. It was the 8th edition, page 334. When masturbation was declared to be a normal behavior by the American Medical Association in 1972, so that's interesting. The American Medical Association in 1972 says that masturbation is a normal behavior. And so the Boy Scout Handbook was updated to reflect the current health information. The new edition stated many young men like to masturbate. People used to think that this caused weakness, insanity, and other physical and mental problems. Doctors today agree that it doesn't cause any of these problems and is really a part of growing up sexually. It is really a part of growing up sexually. Well, of course, conservative religions like Mormonism and Catholicism didn't like this statement, so they made the Boy Scouts tweak it. And here's the 1972 edition of the Boy Scout Handbook. Okay, in 1993, from the Ann Landers column, says, "Dear readers, the sex drive is the strongest human drive after hunger." So that is a basic physiological need. It is nature's way of perpetuating the human race to survive. Males reach their sexual peak as early as 17. There must be an outlet. I am recommending self-gratification, in other words, masturbation, or mutual masturbation with your girlfriend, I guess, or boyfriend, whatever it takes to release the sexual energy. It's probably better than having sex. It's a lot less risky, right? No STIs, no pregnancy. Anyway, this is a sane and safe alternative to intercourse. Sane and safe alternative to intercourse, not only for teenagers, but for older men and women who have lost their partners. I do not want to hear from clergymen telling me that it's a sin, like the Mormons do. The sin is making people feel guilty about responding to this fundamental human drive. So he's saying the general authorities of the Mormon Church are the ones committing sin for their teachings. I love my readers, and my mission is to be of service. This could be the most useful column that I have ever written since I started 38 years ago. And here is a picture of Ann Landers. All right. Studies have found that masturbation is frequent in humans of both sexes and all ages, although there is variation. Boys is higher than girls, etc. Various medical and psychological benefits have been attributed to a healthy attitude towards sexual activity in general and to masturbation in particular. So masturbation has medical and psychological benefits. Not only is it not bad, it's actually good for you. No causal relationship is known between masturbation and any form of mental or physical disorder. And this is from Masturbation as a Means of Achieving Sexual Health, and the masturbation article in the Encyclopedia of Clinical Child and Pediatric Psychology. I'll show a picture of those next. So here's the cover of Masturbation as a Means of Achieving Sexual Health by Bakhtin and Coleman. And here's the cover of the Encyclopedia of Clinical Child and Pediatric Psychology. Okay, 1988, A Parent's Guide, Sex Education or Erotophobia, Sunstone Magazine. In many cases, Mormon individuals were suffering from a hyperactive guilt complex. A lot of guilt and shame because of what the general authorities teach. Masturbation is not only harmless, but masturbation abstinence has a documented history of suicidal risk. We had another slide saying the same thing, and the picture above here is some important risk factors for suicide. Okay, from the Historical Development of New Masturbation Attitudes article again. The radical reversal of attitude, disproving the imaginary dangers of masturbation. The dangers are only imaginary, which took place in the medical and scientific community in the past 60 or 70 years, has yet to be adopted as policy by some in positions of religious authority like the Mormons. So they're like 60 years behind here. Okay, an article by C.B. Broderick, 1967, Dialogue, A Journal of Mormon Thought. There is not the slightest evidence that there are any physically harmful consequences from masturbation. It does not lead to pimples or to mental illness or to impotency. There is not the slightest evidence that there are any physically harmful consequences from masturbation. And above it just says there is no evidence that masturbation causes mental illness or emotional disturbances. True. Okay, the evidence came in the 60s and 70s. Masturbation is harmless. It says masturbation by boys or girls is considered a normal phenomenon of development by professionals in the field of behavioral sciences. It is even considered necessary by many of these professionals for a satisfying psychosexual development. Since masturbation is normal, then it is not a problem and should be off limits as a question that is asked young men who are being advanced in the priesthood. Questioning boys in this area could encourage them to lie to church leaders, to feel unnecessary guilt, or both. So this is a letter to the editor, 1968, Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought. And there is an organization that is trying to stop these sexually explicit interviews of the Mormon youth that is as young as 10, 12, asking them about masturbation and what kind of sex they're having and with whom. This is protectldschildren.org. Protect the children. Stop sexually explicit interviews of the Mormon youth behind closed doors, all alone with an older man. Okay, W.M. Gardner, Shadow Influences a Plural Marriage on Sexuality Within the Contemporary Mormon Experience, 2003. Many Mormon young people have discussed and written to me concerning the crippling effect the shame they feel about masturbation has had on them. A lot are too shamed to even openly discuss the topic, he says. In my opinion, for many, the severe shame they experience due to this behavior, intensified by the God-infused guilt from the general authorities, can severely distort their self-image, healthy development, and consequent healthy behaviors and choices. And you can find this article on the Sunstone Magazine webpage. Okay, a study of thousands of students by BYU sociology professor Wilford E. Smith. It was spanning 1950 to 1972. Found these statistics for Mormon subjects reporting consistent LDS church attendance. So a lot of the BYU students are not falling for the BS statements of the general authorities. Percent who believed masturbation was not immoral, 50% of men and 64% of women. And these are the students that are listening to the general authorities but not believing them. 57% of men say masturbation is not immoral. 64% of women say masturbation is not immoral. And that is probably going up a lot. This is only from 1950 to 1972 as people get updated and correct information. Percent who reported ever masturbating, 78% of men and 27% of women reported ever masturbating. 78% of men, that's a lot. And percent who reported recent masturbation, 50% of men and 11% of women. By the mid-20th century, when modern science had conclusively demonstrated that masturbation was harmless and had come to consider it an important component of healthy sexual development and marital adjustment, Mormonism's tradition of holding on to 19th century policies on masturbation placed the faith once again at odds with contemporary scientific health standards. And you can see these health standards and that it's harmless in American Medical Association's Human Sexuality in 1972. Okay, I found this one on the Planned Parenthood Facebook page. Masturbation can reduce stress. Yep. Release sexual tension. Yep. Improve your self-esteem and body image. Help to treat sexual problems. Yep. Relieve menstrual cramps and muscle tension. Strengthen muscle tone in your pelvic and anal areas. Help you to sleep better. Help you figure out what you like sexually. Yes, indeed. Okay, an article by R.W. McElprang, 1994, Multiply and Replenish Mormon Essays on Sex and Family. Mormon church membership contributes to sexual problems for some people. Problems like low sexual interest, low sexual enjoyment, anxiety during sex, no arousal during sex, difficulty orgasming, premature orgasm, or erectile difficulties. Many Mormons struggle to reconcile their faith's traditions with their own experiences as they seek for answers to questions of personal and marital health. And I've given quite a few resources in this video. This is from that article again, Historical Development of New Masturbation Attitudes in Mormon Culture. The picture here says naked and afraid. Mormons on their honeymoon, because they've been taught that sex is evil their whole lives until they get to their honeymoon, and then everything is supposed to flip and reverse, and sex is supposed to be wonderful. That can cause a lot of anxiety. All right, let's get to the weird and wacky world of Mormon general authorities and their opinions, or they would say their doctrine or revelation on masturbation. Okay, the Mormon medical historian Lester Bush, he notes that in the late 19th century, so maybe 1890s, Mormon authorities accepted the popular notion that masturbation led to genital atrophy and a variety of other physical ailments and could even result in insanity or death. So this was even a popular notion among doctors and so-called scientists of the late 19th century. So the Mormons are just kind of going along with it. Mormon brethren, the general authorities, I guess, received specific apostolic warnings of the chronic and lifelong debility, insanity, and even madness which followed this practice. Lester E. Bush, 1993 work called Health and Medicine Among the Latter-day Saints. Okay, is masturbation self-pleasure or is it self-abuse? D. Michael Quinn's book, The Mormon Hierarchy, Extensions of Power, had the following. In 1870, Apostle Lorenzo Snow, who went on to become the prophet, said that plural marriage would tend to diminish this evil of self-pollution, and he was talking about masturbation. So plural marriage would tend to diminish the evil of masturbation, I guess because you have more wives to have sex with. And in the same book, The Mormon Hierarchy, Extensions of Power, it has the 1871 School of the Prophets Minutes, which recorded Apostle Daniel Wells as stating the following: a great many of our young men are abusing themselves by the habit of self-pollution or masturbation. He regarded this as one great cause of why so many of our young men were not married. They could just masturbate, jerk themselves off, and so they wouldn't have to get married. And it was a great sin and could lead to insanity and premature grave. That's pretty severe. Masturbation can lead to insanity and the premature grave, according to the Apostle Daniel Wells. Okay, an article by O'Donovan in Multiply and Replenish book. In 1886, the polygamous leader Bishop Thomas Taylor was excommunicated for masturbating with several young men in southern Utah. Okay, we now have an account from the Apostolic Diaries of Rutger Clawson. Apparently, the prophet Joseph F. Smith did not like masturbation. This is an account from 1902. The Apostle Rutger Clawson, in his journal, says that church leaders discussed educating parents about masturbation. They only discussed it. The practice of masturbation was indulged in by many young people in church schools. The president, or prophet Joseph F. Smith, remarked that this was a most damnable and pernicious practice. There you go. The prophet Joseph F. Smith says masturbation is damnable and pernicious, and the face of every apostle, president of a stake, and high council should be set as flint against it. Should be set as flint against it. The priesthood should be called together at the state conferences, and the brethren and parents should be instructed and warned in relation to this matter. And here is a picture of Rutger Clausen. Okay, in the same book, Extensions of Power, again by Quinn, in 1903, Rutger Clausen told his fellow apostles, so he was an apostle, that the practice of self-abuse, I guess, or masturbation, existed to an alarming extent among the boys in our community. So even way back in 1903, I guess the boys were not that much different than they are now. Boys and girls should be properly instructed in regard to this evil. Okay, an interesting article in the Improvement Era, A.E. Bealey, January 1913. It's called Insanity. Volume 16, page 231, it starts on. In 1913, an article in the Improvement Era listed sexual immorality as a cause of insanity. Interesting. And then on the next slide, they further define sexual immorality. This is Jack Nicholson here in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Good movie about mental illness. Okay, so Lester E. Bush further defines what sex immorality was back in the time. This is from his book, again, Health and Medicine Among the Latter-day Saints. In the early 1900s, syphilis and masturbation accounted for almost all admissions to the Utah State Mental Hospital attributed to sex immorality. So, in this time frame, masturbation was considered a sex immorality issue, and they said it could cause insanity. All right, so let's jump 30 years into the future to 1942. I guess there wasn't a whole lot said in the last 30 years about masturbation, or if there was, it wasn't very controversial. But we come to a very controversial statement here. This is in a Be Ye Clean article in the Improvement Era, February 1943. It was delivered at the April 1942 General Conference of the Church. It's a message from the First Presidency. The prophet was Heber J. Grant at the time. Sexual purity is the youth's most precious possession. Sexual purity is the most precious possession of the youth. It is the foundation of all righteousness. Better to be dead clean, in other words, morally clean. Better to be dead morally clean than alive and unclean. What a harsh statement. Better dead clean than alive unclean. A lot of shame and guilt came out of this statement. Definitely going to cause some suicidal ideation. All right, we jump 16 years into the future. 1958 now. We have Bruce R. McConkie's seminal work, Mormon Doctrine. Very popular encyclopedia for Mormons. He recommends going against the advice of psychiatrists and medical doctors. He says an individual may go to a psychiatrist for treatment because of a serious guilt complex, caused by the church, and consequent mental disorder arising out of some form of sex immorality, masturbation, for instance. Have a guilt complex because you masturbate. You listen to what the church leaders say. They say you're evil, so you go to a psychiatrist. It is not uncommon for some psychiatrists in such situations to persuade the patient that masturbation itself is not an evil. So even here in 1958, psychiatrists knew that masturbation was not evil and it was just a normal part of growing up. But McConkie does not want you to listen to them. He wants you to listen to the church. That his trouble arises from the false teachings of the church, that such a practice is unclean, and that therefore by discarding the teaching of the church, the guilt complex will cease and mental stability return. McConkie just gave the kids the answer. It's the church that is the problem. Yes. It is those worthiness interviews that is the problem. It is the shame and the guilt that is the problem. The problem is not masturbation. Listen to the medical authorities, and your guilt will go away, and your mental stability will return. In this way, iniquity is condoned. So he goes against that, the psychiatrist. And many people are kept from complying with the law whereby they could become clean and spotless before the Lord, in the process of which they would gain the mental and spiritual peace that overcomes mental disorders. So you don't need to see a psychiatrist. You don't need to go to a mental hospital. You just need to become clean before the Lord and get mental and spiritual peace. And here is Bruce R. McConkie, who went on to become an apostle. All right, the Apostle Spencer W. Kimball, in his book, The Miracle of Forgiveness, 1969, one of the most popular Mormon books of all time. The Apostle Kimball says, prophets anciently and today condemn masturbation. So he says today they condemn masturbation, which would be 1969. That's true. Including himself as an apostle. But as far as anciently goes, I challenge anybody to find any good scriptures on masturbation in the Bible or the Book of Mormon, which would be ancient. There aren't any. Okay, the Apostle Kimball continues in his book, The Miracle of Forgiveness. 1.5 million copies sold. That is a blockbuster for a Mormon book. He says, while we should not regard this weakness of masturbation as the heinous sin which some other sexual practices are, maybe like fornication, it is of itself bad enough to require sincere repentance. And hence you have to confess it to your bishop in those wonderful worthiness interviews. And I say that with the most sarcasm I can muster. That is nonsense. It does not require repentance. What is more, it often leads to grievous sin, even to that sin against nature, homosexuality. So he says masturbation leads to homosexuality. Nonsense. If that was the case, 95% of men would be gay because they all masturbated. He continues, for done in private, it evolves often into mutual masturbation practiced with another person of the same sex. So you do it in private for a while, then you start doing it with your friends. Even if you're heterosexual, not bloody likely. Maybe mutual masturbation with someone of the opposite sex for heterosexuals. That makes sense. So he says it evolves into mutual masturbation practiced with another person of the same sex. So again, it'll turn you into a homosexual. And thence into total homosexuality. So a lot of shame and guilt were created by this book. He was very open about this kind of stuff in the book. And it's a real shame because it really distorted the sexuality of a lot of young kids' lives. The Apostle Kimball continues, many would-be authorities declare that masturbation, is natural and acceptable. Would-be authorities. No, those are actual medical professionals, Kimball. And they are right. It is natural and acceptable. And frequently the young men that I interview cite these advocates to justify the practice of it. Good. And that's why like 60% of Mormons don't see anything wrong with it. And that was back in the 1960s and 70s. Today it's probably a lot higher. To this, we must respond that the world's norms in many areas depart increasingly from God's law. The church has a different, higher norm. So the Apostle Kimball says the church knows more than medical professionals. Let's get to some serious sexual repression here. This is from the Apostle Boyd K. Packer in a pamphlet called Two Young Men Only in 1976. Doesn't he realize that quite a few women masturbate as well? That's kind of hilarious. Two young men only. Is it more important that they don't masturbate because they hold the priesthood? Anyway, the Apostle Boyd K. Packer said that the youth would hardly be aware of their sexual desire during puberty if they could remain completely abstinent from masturbation. So they wouldn't even be aware of their sexual desires arising within them, even though they hit puberty. And Packer says, when this power begins to form your sexuality, it might be likened to having a little factory in your body. Unless you tamper with it, in other words, masturbate, you will hardly be aware that it is working at all. So just completely repress all your sexual thoughts and actions. What great advice. Okay, from the same pamphlet, the Apostle Boyd K. Packer again. If you do that, which is masturbate, the little factory will speed up. You don't want your sexuality to speed up. You want to repress it. Remember that, repress it. You can quickly be subjected to a habit. Yeah, because it's a basic physiological need. One that is not worthy, one that will leave you feeling depressed and feeling guilty, only because of the words you say, Packer. That's the only reason people feel depressed and guilty. It is not pleasing to the Lord, nor is it pleasing to you. It does not make you feel worthy or clean. Okay, and then the Apostle Packer, also in General Conference the same year in 1976, had the following to say: there are ways to conquer such a habit of masturbation. First of all, you must leave that factory alone, your sexuality and your penis. Leave it alone long enough for it to slow down. Work the repression, work the magic of repression. Resisting it is not easy. It will take weeks and even months, but you can get the little factory slowed back to where it should be. So in the Mormon Church, we have masturbation abstinence as a requirement for the youth to be clean and worthy of the presence of God's Spirit, without which one would experience a spiritual death and a separation from God, which is very serious and disturbing to a Mormon youth. Here we have the chewed piece of gum example in the picture. The Mormon youth, especially the girls, if they have sex, they are compared to a chewed up piece of gum. You are now used and dirty and unclean. Okay, we now have the Apostle Mark E. Peterson's Steps to Overcoming Masturbation. This came out in the 1980s. If you are tempted to masturbate, think of having to bathe in a tub of worms and eat several of them as you do the act. So it's like an aversion therapy to get you to not masturbate. And he also said, tie a hand to the bed frame. Yep, you heard that right. Tie a hand to the bed frame with a tie in order that the habit of masturbation in a semi-sleep condition can be broken. So here we have a guy pictured here with his hands tied to the bed frame. And we have the Apostle Mark E. Peterson again, 1969. He does not believe that sex is a biological need. He says sex is for the procreation of the species, so only when you want to have a baby. Sex is not for sensual pleasure. What a recipe for repression and disaster. Sex is not for sensual pleasure. God made it clean and sacred. He intends that we shall keep it so. All right, the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet, 1990. Our Heavenly Father has counseled that sexual intimacy should be reserved for his children within the bonds of marriage. Because sexual intimacy is so sacred, the Lord requires self-control and purity before marriage. The Lord specifically forbids certain behaviors, including all sexual relations before marriage. And then they list masturbation or preoccupation with sex in thought, speech, or action. All Latter-day Saints must learn to control and discipline themselves. Well, you'll be repressed and you'll have guilt and shame because most of the kids are masturbating. And here we have the cover of the 1990 For the Strength of Youth pamphlet. All right, the Mormon author Brad Wilcox, Growing Up, Gospel Answers About Maturation and Sex in 2000. The world views the practice of masturbation as a harmless, natural sexual outlet that is a normal part of growing up. Yep, that's true. And we have all the clinical evidence and studies and journals to prove it in this video. But there is evidence that this practice, masturbation, carries with it serious emotional and spiritual consequences. Emotional, not true. Spiritual, that's up for debate. The immediate consequence of any transgression is withdrawal of the Spirit. So that's serious for a youth of the church. And we have the Mormon author G. Von Harrison, wrote a book called Is Kissing Sinful? 1994. Does not believe that sex is a biological need. He says, if you allow yourself to become sexually aroused prior to marriage, you commit a moral sin. Even if you have an erection during a dream and you have a nocturnal emission, come on. Outside the bonds of matrimony, the Lord does not condone any degree of sexual arousal. It's pretty harsh. All right, more from the Historical Development of New Masturbation Attitudes article. As Mormon leaders face growing new evidence of the health benefits of masturbation and the mental and physical health risks of abstinence, they face the dilemma of maintaining a policy towards masturbation that is now increasingly viewed as medically dangerous by church membership. Okay, so we've had some medical discoveries that masturbation abstinence actually increases the risk of prostate cancer, and it increases the risk of youth suicide in males, and it can undermine orgasm and marital functioning in females or women. Public opinion today is now endorsing masturbation as a healthy and moral behavior more than ever before. Some churches have revised their former public positions and no longer consider masturbation morally wrong or sinful, which is what the Mormon Church needs to do. A couple of sources for this is Cornog, The Big Book of Masturbation, From Angst to Zeal, and Rowan, The Joy of Self-Pleasuring, and we'll show the covers of those next. So here's the cover of Martha Cornog's book, The Big Book of Masturbation, From Angst to Zeal, if you want to know more about this. And here's the cover of Edward L. Rowan, MD's book, The Joy of Self-Pleasuring, Why Feel Guilty About Feeling Good. So Mormon bishops are allowed to interview teen boys and girls as young as 10 years old about their masturbation habits and other sexual activities. Some of them go way too far and try to get juicy details, and then it becomes voyeurism at that point. So that's very inappropriate. Mormonism needs to change that. And that is going to do it for this video, and I thank you for watching Mormonism and Masturbation video.